in probably one of the most haunted places in the world. Everything in here has been taken from some place here.
Welcome to Seekers of the Supernatural. My name is Tony Sparrow. I'll be your moderator tonight.
Are you scared? I can see you from behind. You can hear me in your mind. Run so fast as you can go. Time will catch you before you know.
Sometimes there's nothing like relaxing on your couch and enjoying a good scare. A lot of people get freaked out by toy dolls. From Chucky to the Boy, something about a doll's blank face and glassy eyes really creeps people out. One of the most popular creepy dolls right now is Annabelle. She's famous because her story is based on real events, which might be even scarier than the movie. First, check under your bed, then let's dive in. We might know the movie version of Annabelle from The Conjuring in 2013, which starts with a spooky true story. In the film, a porcelain doll is given to a nurse, and it starts acting weird and frightening. But the real story behind Annabelle is quite different. In reality, Annabelle wasn't like the scary doll in the movie. It was actually a sweet-looking Raggedy Ann doll. It seems harmless, right? It's very different from the creepy doll in the film, which I definitely wouldn't want in my home. The real story began in 1970, when a woman gave her daughter, Deidre, sometimes called Donna, a Raggedy Ann doll for her 28th birthday. Maybe the mom wanted to give her a nostalgic gift. Deidre, a student nurse, lived with her roommate in an apartment and started taking the doll to bed. Soon, the doll started behaving strangely. It would move to different places on the bed and appear in different rooms. Deidre and her roommate found it more interesting than scary. They thought the doll had a spirit in it, so they contacted a medium. During a seance, the medium said the doll was hosting the spirit of Annabelle Higgins, a young girl who had died, possibly murdered, near their apartment. Annabelle's spirit was lonely and felt a connection with the nurses, so she chose to stay with them. The nurses, being kind, agreed to let Annabelle stay. They treated her like a person and even gave her clothes and accessories. But soon, strange things started happening. Knocking sounds, unexplained cold spots, and creepy whispers. One night after their shifts, the nurses came home to find Annabelle standing in the hallway as if waiting for them. This was a floppy doll with soft legs, and they couldn't make it stand up again. One of the nurses' fiancés wanted them to get rid of Annabelle, even suggesting they burn her. That night, he had a nightmare where Annabelle tried to strangle him. When he woke up, he threw Annabelle across the room and yelled at her. Then, 7 scratches appeared on his body. Things got even creepier when they received mysterious messages written on parchment paper, even though none of them had parchment paper. They checked their apartment for intruders but found nothing. It seemed Annabelle was causing all the trouble. The final straw was when they discovered what looked like blood spots on the doll's hands and chest. The nurses decided to get help, so they went to their local Catholic church for advice. The priest suggested they reach out to some paranormal experts who could handle the situation. That's where Ed and Lorraine Warren come in. Remember them from the Conjuring movies? They're known as ghost hunters and paranormal researchers. Ed and Lorraine Warren started the New England Society for Psychic Research, NESPR, in 1952. They spent 40 years investigating over 10,000 cases of hauntings and possessions. If you had a spooky problem in the 70s or 80s, they were the ones to call. They talked about 3 stages of demonic activity: infestation, oppression, and possession. Infestation includes things like whispers, footsteps, and feeling a presence. Lorraine Warren, who is real, was involved in the case of the Raggedy Ann doll in 1971. This case was their first big one. When the Warrens interviewed the nurses, they were shocked to learn that the nurses were treating Annabelle like a real person. The Warrens knew that Annabelle wasn't a child's spirit, but a demon pretending to be one to gain sympathy. To deal with this evil force, an exorcism was necessary. Fortunately, Ed Warren was one of the few in the Catholic Church allowed to perform this ritual. The Warrens cleansed the house and everyone in it of Annabelle's evil influence, but the doll was too dangerous to leave behind. Deidre must have been relieved when the Warrens agreed to take Annabelle to their home for safekeeping. However, their drive back was far from smooth, with the car breaking down repeatedly. It wasn't until they sprinkled Annabelle with holy water that things calmed down. Even after arriving at their home, the creepiness continued. Ed Warren claimed he saw the doll floating beside his desk, so they kept it in a separate part of their house. But Annabelle didn't stop there. A priest friend of theirs who had taken them for a ride in his new car later looked at Annabelle, picked her up, and threw her across the room. He later got into a serious car accident, though he survived. He remembered seeing the doll just before the crash. Another story involves a homicide detective who, while Ed Warren was out, picked up Annabelle. The encounter left him so shaken he couldn't speak about it. The Warrens kept all the cursed items from their cases, including Annabelle, in a special vault for nightmares next to their house. Despite getting these objects blessed weekly, they never destroyed them for fear of releasing the demonic energy inside. They even charged admission to their museum to see these haunted items. Annabelle was just their first really terrifying case, but she's the most dangerous object they kept. The scariest story of all happened when a group of college students visited the museum. One day, a student mocked the Annabelle doll and dared it to harm him. This was a terrible idea. Ed Warren kicked him and his girlfriend out of the museum, and they left on their motorbike. Less than 3 hours later, the student died in a motorcycle crash, smashing into a tree. His girlfriend survived but spent a year in the hospital. It's pretty chilling, right? The Warrens believe you shouldn't challenge evil forces, and this incident seems to prove their point. The Warrens were involved in many famous hauntings, some of which you might recognize from movies. One of the most famous was the Amityville Horror in 1975. In this case, an evil spirit haunted a family so intensely that they fled their home in the middle of the night. The story became well known and inspired over 11 movies. The Lutz family experienced terrifying events just 28 days after moving into their new house. Another major case was the Enfield poltergeist in the UK in 1977, often called England's Amityville. This haunting affected the Hodgson family on a normal street in Enfield near London. Teenage sisters Janet and Margaret and their brother Billy were tormented by a ghost, which caused furniture to move, made loud knocking sounds, and sometimes possessed them. One of the scariest parts was when Janet seemed to speak in a creepy voice, claiming to be a man named Bill Wilkins who had died in the house. Witnesses, including friends, neighbors, and even police officers, reported seeing these supernatural events, like Janet floating and objects being thrown around. Even the police were baffled by a chair moving on its own. When official sources start to support these claims, it adds to the belief in their reality. After about 18 months, the haunting seemed to end in 1979. However, not everyone believes these stories are real. While it can be fun to think about creepy phenomena, there's concern that it might encourage people to engage with things they shouldn't or negatively affect mental health. For instance, there's something called EVP, electronic voice phenomena, where people claim to record voices of the dead during silent moments. It's often featured on ghost hunting shows, but its authenticity is debated. We recorded a voice in a room where a woman was on a bed, and it said just one name. It sounds like a woman's voice. Or does it? Darren Brown, a professional known for investigating supernatural claims, consulted a forensic engineer who specializes in sound analysis for court cases. After listening to the recording, the engineer suggested that it might just be electronic interference picked up by a sensitive recorder due to radio waves, which could be interpreted as a voice if you wanted to. Unfortunately, many of the experiences reported in the Warrens' case files align with symptoms of conditions like schizophrenia, addiction, and family problems. It's a shame that no one was allowed to verify the Warrens' findings. Ed Warren often didn't let others check his details, though some information was shared in movies and books, which raises a red flag. For instance, the nurses from the Annabelle case have never appeared on record to confirm their story. Even recently, people who know them say they avoid discussing the doll. If the items in the Warrens' museum were truly dangerous, it seems odd that the public was allowed to view them. It's like taking a tour of a minefield, exciting but risky. Although the Warrens didn't take money directly from their cases, book sales, seminar tours, and movies likely boosted their income. Many people have called them liars over the years, and it's unfortunate they didn't have modern recording equipment. Plus, many witnesses chose to remain anonymous, making it harder to prove their stories. Now that Ed and Lorraine have passed away, it's hard to get more answers. But whether the Annabelle case and the Enfield poltergeist are true or just elaborate hoaxes, they've inspired some really scary movies. With technology like deep fakes and confirmed UFOs, it's getting harder to distinguish fact from fiction. It makes you think, right? If given a choice between facing a demon or the real-life monsters from other stories I've covered, I'd probably choose the demon. Now let's listen to Ed and Lauren's interview on this topic and hear the story from their perspective.
If you could tell us how you and Ed began the work and how long ago it was.
Wow, it's a long time, Tony. It was over 50 years ago that we began as husband and wife to do it. Not long after Ed came home, after serving in World War II, he began talking about that home he grew up in Bridgeport, began talking about the hauntings that had occurred there. That was really hard for me to accept that. I had never been in a haunted home, but I always had something about myself I didn't understand, and that was an ability to know things through extrasensory perception. But I suppressed those feelings, Tony, to a great extent because there really was no one I could share them with. Now, with Ed, it was important to him to satisfy his curiosity regarding that house that he grew up in. Did other families really experience the types of things that he experienced? And as artist, because he was now studying art and already beginning to sell his paintings very early on in his career after getting out of the service, within the first couple of years.
Let me ask you, you said you had the ability to know things.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that, and what year, how old were you?
It started about 9, Tony, that I had the ability to, I could see lights around people and know things about these people, but I didn't quite understand it. But I always had tremendous faith. I still do. I always felt that through prayer, anything could be changed. If it was God's will, anything could be helped. And I always relied on that. But I didn't understand what I experienced. Also, the night I met my husband, and I knew I was going to spend my life with him, I fully did not understand that. That was my first outstanding thing that happened in my young adult life.
Now, let me interrupt for one moment. Ed, I'd like you to address that.
Well, you got to understand, Tony, that there was a lot of confusion when I was small because my father, who was a police officer at that time, would always say to me, Ed, there's a logical reason for everything that happens in this house. These were not logical things. You don't see the spirit of an old woman coming out of a closet. Your bed doesn't shake. You don't hear pounding sounds. The room doesn't turn icy cold. You don't see lights flashing across the room. These were not logical things. My dad knew it. But on the other hand, he didn't want to frighten us. And he always felt that his religious beliefs were strong enough to take care of anything in that house because he was a very spiritual man. I don't think I ever know my father missing a day's Mass. He always made sure he went to Mass in the morning or went to church after work when he'd come home late at night. But he'd always make a visit to the church. So what I wanted to do was to find out if what he said was true. There's a logical reason for everything, Ed, but there wasn't.
This is a house in Bridgeport?
This is a house in Bridgeport, Connecticut on Jane Street. That was haunted. I lived there from the age of 5 until 12.
Mm-hmm.
This was my indoctrination into the world of the supernatural and preternatural. Now, I went to a parochial school, which is a Catholic school, and the nuns were constantly talking about apparitions, the Holy Ghost, spirits. You know, this was part of Catholic doctrine, still is today. So that I was familiar with that, and I would connect what was happening in my home with what was happening or in school, what they were telling me. And then I would hear this old priest talk about a man being possessed 2 streets down from where I lived, and that exorcism was going to be performed. Now, I was only a kid. I'm only 8, 9, 10 years old, you know. But I understood what they were talking about. I had an inner knowledge even at that time. A lot of people say to me, well, Ed, you're one of 7 religious demonologists in the country today. How did you become a demonologist? Did you go to school for that? Do you have some kind of a diploma or certificate? No. I was born a demonologist. I had the inner knowledge that I use today. In fact, a lot of priests will come to me and say, where did you learn about this? It wasn't anything I learned out of a book. And then, as Lorraine and I went from one case to another, 50 years ago, we put these cases into certain categories. Mm-hmm. Earthbound spirits, demonic, inhuman spirits, poltergeist. And we took all of this knowledge and we put it into 9 books that we have today. We're working on number 10. But this was important for us because as a kid, I'd read a book and it would be about a certain case of a haunting. And then I'd read another book. It was something about the same haunting, but things had changed. One writer had changed it from the other. So I told Lorraine, we can't pay attention too much to what these people are saying in these books. We have to take the knowledge that we have, and that's the knowledge we'll put into our books.
Do you remember, like, the first case you guys ever went on together?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what it was?
The Ocean-Born Mary House in Henniker, New Hampshire. And it was in that house, Tony. Now, remember, we were up there to deliver paintings. But it was Ed was drawn to these places like a magnet.
For those who perhaps haven't tuned in before, Ed and Lorraine are known artists. And I think they had panned in on one of Ed's paintings before we even began the program tonight. Can you tell us a little bit about that painting, Ed?
That's a screen castle in Scotland. Mm-hmm. And of course, Lorraine and I do a lot of traveling. And I take pictures of haunted areas. When I get home, I'll do paintings of them. That's what this particular painting is about. But in my earlier years, when I left art school, I came home one day. I said to Lorraine, look it, all the tourist areas are opening up in Vermont, New Hampshire. Now we're talking early 1950s.
Right.
I know that if I do some quick paintings of New England scenes, seascapes, landscapes, we could sell them for fantastic prices. We'll be rich. I said, we'll be on Easy Street. And I did sell them.
How much?
For $3, $4. But don't laugh, Tony.
That was good money then.
$3. You could stay overnight for $1 a piece in a cabin. Hot dogs were 10 cents. Hamburgers were 10 cents. Gasoline was 18 cents a gallon. So, you know, if I sold 4 or 5 paintings for $4 or $5, we were on top of the world. And we're hobnobbing with all these tourists. So it was a fun time for us. And I would say to her, I heard about this house. In fact, I'll give you a rundown on that. We had to deliver 6 paintings to a logging camp up in Vermont, New Hampshire.
New Hampshire.
And we took this couple with us. It was a Sunday. We started out early. We figured it would take us 7 hours to get up there, 7 hours to get back. We were kids. We didn't care. And we dropped off the paintings for this kid who had bought them for his brother for his wedding. But on the way up there, we came to a sign, and it said Henniker. I said, Henniker? Son of a gun, I said. I just read about Henniker, New Hampshire, about 3 weeks ago, a haunted house called the Ocean-Born Mary House. And this kid in the back says, Ed, there must be a million Hennikers. We round the curve, Tony, and there's a sign there. Mm-hmm. And the sign says, "This is the only Henniker on earth."
Now, you have seen that sign.
seen that
You
sign.
and
That sign is
Judy.
still there today.
Still there
You and
today.
Judy were there. Yes.
And that was over 50 years ago?
That was over 50 years ago.
Yes.
It's probably a different sign, but the
But it
sign is still
says the
there.
same
It
thing.
says the same
And
thing.
I said to them, "This is a fascinating case. It's of a woman who was born at sea when the pirates attacked the ship her mother was on. Her mother became all excited and frustrated, had the child. The pirate captain came on board and said, 'If you'll name that child Mary after my mother, I'll spare everybody on board. No problem.' The child was named Mary. But the strange thing is that this captain, who was named Captain Perry, kept in touch with the baby when she even grew up after she was married. Her name was Mary Walsh. The husband died. The pirate captain built this beautiful big home up on a hill in Henniker. We was pretty old at that time, and I guess she probably was in her late 40s. So with the husband being gone, he made her a deal. He said, 'Look it, if you'll come and be my housekeeper with your sons,' she had 7 sons, very tall guys.
And she was very tall.
He said, you can live here for the rest of your life." Well, she took on that responsibility, but he was found murdered in the orchard one day, killed with a cutlass. I guess somebody was trying to find out where he hid his treasure. But Mary continued to live on in the house with her sons. And she lived there until she was 98 years old. But after she died, Tony, people would talk about a ghostly coach pulling up in front of the house where the well was. Her apparition would get out of the coach, go to the well, drop a package in, then go back to the coach and would drive off. Now, many people of Henniker said they experienced this haunting. There were 2 detectives from Concord who said, "This is a bunch of bunk. We're going up there, we're going to spend the night." Well, halfway through the night, they got so frightened, they fled back to Concord. And that's what interested me. Why would 2 guys, detectives, gave their names and everything, be frightened of something in an old house?
Really?
Something happened. I wanted to know what that something was. So we get to Henniker. Where do you find out where there's a haunted house? The nearest college. New England College was in its infancy at that
All the
time.
kids know about
All kids know where
Right.
hauntings are. Yes.
Just go outside the village, go underneath the iron bridge, take your first left, up a dirt road to the top of the mountain. That's where the Ocean-born Mary house is. We did that. I want to tell you, it was late in October. The wind was blowing. Leaves were all off the trees. And this is the time that Ocean-born Mary's ghostly coach was supposed to show up. So we're going up there, and there was a strange whistling sound, sort of like air coming through a window. Maybe it was air coming through a window, but it had a very strange,
eerie sound to it.
yeah. And we get up there. Here's this huge, big, dark, stark house.
Oh, you should
No
see
lights on.
I've seen it
I
recently.
park out in front.
Oh,
I said,
that's
"There's a
right.
kid
You've seen that."
in back of me. "Jerry, go up and knock on the door. See if you can get in the house." Now, this guy doesn't believe in ghosts. "Ed, there's no way I'm getting out of this car and going up to that door and knocking on it. So we need a volunteer." We shoved Lorraine out the door.
No, they didn't
Slammed the
shove
door
me
and
out.
locked it, and she went up.
Nobody would go. Now, Tony, being brought up as I was, a very sheltered, private Catholic girls' schools, the whole bit, I never feared the dark. I never had fears of the dark.
Yeah,
In
but how many
fact,
people would walk up to that house and knock on a door?
I
Yeah,
didn't
really.
fear things like that. Maybe I had nothing to compare it with, nothing that I ever had to be frightened of.
I can see she never seen Frankenstein.
No,
really.
and I was never
I
interested.
understand, though, that you had your first psychic or out-of-the-body experience there.
My very, very first. And in that home, Tony, as I listened, all I could think of as I listened to Mr. Roy tell Ed the story of that house and what he experienced and what his mother had experienced in the past was the sincerity in his voice. That is what that is what more or less I was listening to. I was listening to that, and I probably, Tony, was watching his aura, because that will tell a great deal about the person. But then all of a sudden, the room became very quiet, and my ears were ringing, and they rang so loud that it blotted out everything that was in that room. Then it felt as if someone came behind me there was a tremendous jolt to my body, and I was out of my body. What a beautiful experience that really was. Today, as I speak to people, as I speak to everyone that's listening, I wish everybody could have an experience like that, because what it proves, Tony, is that we are truly both body and soul.
Well, Ed, isn't it true that everybody will experience that at one point in their life?
Well, out-of-the-body experiences are about as frequent as people breaking bones today. I would have to say that maybe 7 out of 10 people have that experience.
But how
I've never had it.
about
myself.
when they pass on from
When
this
they
life?
pass on,
Then they will
sure.
go out of
Yes.
the body, correct?
yes.
Isn't that how you classify it? Their spirit would leave the body?
Yes, at the moment of death, Tony. That is exactly what. Now, there are nurses, and there are doctors, and there are family members who claim to have actually witnessed that when people have
They actually
passed.
see the spirit leave?
They actually see the spirit leave a person at the moment of death. But to experience that while you are still very much alive,
I know, that must be great.
It's just a transition from this physical body into the spirit world. But it was like my brother, who died recently. He was interested to a certain extent. And I never found out why he was never home at night until 2 days before he died. I said, Frank, where were you all those nights? I said, I'd be home alone. My parents wouldn't be there. My sister wasn't there. He wouldn't be there. I said, where were you? He said, I never wanted to tell you. He said, but I wasn't going to be in that house.
Wow.
He said, my room was right at the head of the stairs where the door would open up and the footsteps would come up. And he said how he would see this white glow. He said, I wasn't going to stay in that house, but I didn't find that out until 2 days before he died.
Wow.
He never told me about it.
You know, that's really a long time ago that you guys started out, but I know you've had thousands literally of cases.
oh God, yes.
And I also know that you have a museum on your property.
Yes.
Now, Ed, would you want to just tell a little bit about some of the things, perhaps, that are in that museum that are really fascinating, scary things, perhaps, that you've collected over the years?
All right, I think one of the most famous would be Annabelle. This is a Raggedy Ann doll that's made like thousands of other dolls, except that this doll was used in communication, almost like having a seance. A nurse had received the doll 1971 as a present, a Christmas present from her mother. And the doll stands about 3 foot high. And she would take it to bed with her at night. That's common enough for girls to do. I take a pillow. Some people take a doll. Girls would like that. Even 28-year-old ones. And after a few nights, she lived with another girl who was a nurse. Both of them St. Hartford or Hartford
Was
Hospital.
Hartford Hospital?
It was Hartford Hospital, honey.
And they were on the same shift, and so they worked together, they lived together, they shared the expenses. And one morning she got this idea to bring the doll from the bedroom into the kitchen where they were having breakfast, and she put it in a chair. And she said, oh, Raggedy Ann here's going to have breakfast with us today, joking around. Okay, well, that was a joke. Then, the next thing,
Bless you.
the next thing, she brought it down again the next morning, and the next morning. But the third morning, they're talking to the doll, and the arms of the doll are on the chair like this. Suddenly they went up and onto the table. Now this didn't frighten them. This intrigued them, to the extent that the one nurse said to the other one of the nurses knows a medium. Let's ask her about this. I'll bet you there's a spirit in that doll. That's what they did. They asked this nurse about it, and she said, yeah. She said, I know a woman who is a medium. I'll bring her over, and we'll hold a seance. It was a joke, just a game. But it didn't turn out to be a game. It turned out to be one of the most horrifying experiences they'd ever have in their life. And I've talked with people just recently, as recent as 2 months ago, who know the two nurses. And even today, they don't like to talk about it. They'll never come to our lectures. They don't want to talk about Raggedy Ann, Annabelle at all. So now the woman holds a seance, and she said, there's a spirit of a 6-year-old girl in that doll who was killed in an automobile accident just outside of your apartment house here. Well, there was a 6-year-old child by the name of Annabelle who was killed. But God does not allow the spirit of a child to go into a doll. This was a demon who was posing as that little child to create sympathy to these 2 young women, which it did. Now this was no longer a doll. This was a child. They would take it for rides. They'd talk to it. They'd buy clothing for it, jewelry. They treated it just as though it was that little girl who was killed, Annabelle. Now they were giving it a lot of recognition. Soon after the first seance, things would happen in their house, what we refer to as infestation. There'd be knocking sounds. They'd see flashing lights in their bedroom at night, shooting across the room. The bed would shake a little bit. It would get icy cold. They'd hear whispering, which we call magic whispering. Now, from time to time, these girls would change shifts, but they were getting a little scared now. So they decided to stay on the same shift all the time, 4 to 12. They'd leave the doll in the bedroom. They'd come home after midnight, put the key in the door, unlock the door, and who do you think is standing there? The Raggedy Ann doll.
Standing there.
Now that doll has flimsy legs. If you try to stand it up, you can't. But I've seen that doll stand. I've seen a lot of things happen around that doll. Well, this still didn't scare them. But one of the fiancés of one of the girls was against all of this. He said, burn the doll, throw it away, get rid of it. It's evil. Well, he falls asleep one afternoon, a Saturday. And the doll is in a chair not far from him. And the girls are cleaning up the apartment. He wakes up with a start. He said, my God, what a nightmare. He said, I dreamt that that doll was strangling me. He had marks on his throat. Was it psychosomatic? Well, let's see. He gets up, he looks at the doll in the chair, picks it up, and throws it right across the room. You're nothing but a rag doll. You couldn't hurt anyone. With that, Tony, 7 psychic slashes appear on his body. Wow. Now, we've seen these kind of slashes. We've filmed them. These slashes come from nowheres. The blood came right through his shirt. The nurses witnessed this. Then, a huge chair rolled across the room. Pictures on the walls came off, started smashing and breaking. Loud pounding sounds. Now they were all frightened. They called the High Episcopal Canon in Hartford, Connecticut. He called Father Richard Nolan, an exorcist, and Father Nolan called us. We went to the apartment. Exorcism was performed immediately over the people, the 3 people, and the apartment. I brought that doll back to my museum. Now, why would I have something like that in a museum? Evidence, proof. The skeptics, the atheists, the first thing they attack you with is, where's the evidence? Where's the proof? This never happened. I not only have the doll, I have film, I have recordings, I have eyewitness accounts from credible people who have seen these phenomena happen in and around that doll. A priest comes to my home one day, young fella, has his rectory right here in Connecticut. Ed, I'd like to take you and Lorraine for a ride in my new car. Very proud of it. We went with him. When he took us back, he said, what about this doll everybody's talking about? Because we had shown it on Channel 18, on a TV show we're on. Could I see it? I understand it puts slashes on people. I brought him into the museum. It's in a chair. He looks at it. Just like the guy in Hartford. He walks right over to it, never said a word, picked it up and threw it right across the room. God is more powerful than a devil. I said, yes, Father. God is more powerful than millions of devils. But he wasn't. He found that out. Less than an hour later, driving home on Route 84, his brand new car went out of control. I know what he's talking about because the same thing happened to Lorraine and I when we talked about Amityville one time on Route 84. You can't control the car. Half of his car was sheared off by a tractor-trailer truck. He should have been killed, but he lived. God will only let the devil go so far. The last thing he remembers seeing was the image of that doll. Well, Then a detective comes to our house. We're working on the murder of a little child. Lorraine often helps the police through her clairvoyance. I through my knowledge of ritual magic murders. After we were through, he said, Ed, could I go out to the museum there and look around? Sure, I brought him out. Now, this is a homicide detective. You were a cop. These guys are tough guys. They're used to seeing grisly sights, right?
Mm-hmm.
He looks around and he said, you know, of all the things in this building here, that doll there, I can't take my eyes off of it, the Raggedy Ann. It was still in the chair. Just then, the phone rang. It was a personal call. I told him I'd be right back, not to touch anything in that building.
Mm-hmm.
Everything in there was unholy, unblessed.
Right.
Well, I'm up there talking on the phone. I wasn't even there 10 minutes when all of a sudden I hear him coming up the stairs. This guy is a big guy, 6'2", 6'3", over 200 pounds, all muscle, used to seeing grisly sights. He's shaking. He can't hardly talk. I thought he was having a heart attack. I sat him down. I was going to call an ambulance. There was no 911 then. Called an ambulance, said, no, Ed, it's not that. I said, what's wrong? I just don't want to talk about it. He was embarrassed. Lorraine walked in. He looks at Lorraine. He said, I'll talk to Lorraine about it, but I don't want her to ever mention it again. She didn't have to. I knew what he did. I went back down into the building. Everything was knocked over. He had picked up the doll. He had picked up that inanimate object. Its aura mingled with his aura. And something so terrible occurred to that man that he resigned from the police department 3 months later. But that's not the end. We had a group
It's almost
of
the end of
college
the
students.
show. We're almost out of time. So
We're almost out of time.
if you could
Well,
quickly end that one.
A group of college students came one day. One of them said this is nothing but a bunch of bunk. I don't believe in it. He went over to the Raggedy Ann doll, which is in a case, knocking on it. He said, this doll can't do anything. I dare it right now to put slashes on me. I put him out of the building. Less than 3 hours later, that boy was dead. His girlfriend, who had been with him on a motorcycle, said he was laughing about the doll, smashed into a tree, head on, was killed instantly. His girlfriend was in a hospital for over a year.
That's
You
unbelievable.
don't challenge devils. I think we got a picture of the
That's
Raggedy Ann there.
unbelievable. Yeah, I think we do somewhere here.
Yeah.
While we're showing this, I think we'd like to tell the website address, wouldn't we?
Yes.
If we could pan in on this here.
Yeah, that's
This will show
Annabelle.
the Annabelle. But why don't you give the website address, Lorraine?
Okay, www.warrens, that's plural with an S, .net.
Okay. And your address is P.O. Box 41,
Right?
Monroe, Connecticut, 06468.
That's
And
it.
today is January 26th. The year is 2000, and it's Rod Vesey, our producer. It's his 40th birthday today, so we want to wish Rod a happy 40th birthday.
Happy-
And the man who had an encounter with the white lady.
The same
And Rod
man.
Vesey did have an encounter with a white lady several years ago, which someday we'll have him come on and talk about. In the meantime, we're glad to be back in the year 2000. We'll be back with more new shows. We thank our audience.
What do you think about these scary stories? Do you believe in the Warrens cases? Have you ever had a spooky experience? Share your thoughts in the comments below.